The Lenovo Legion Go S, specifically the version with the AMD Z2Go in it, is impossible to recommend. Now, the good news is that Lenovo has a version of this particular model that has a Z1E in it. The Z1E APU is very old at this point, but when we compare it, especially when we look at the benchmarks that I've done, you're going to see just how much better the Z1E is over the Z2Go. There's just a lot of fundamental problems, especially more so running on Windows and how it runs a lot of things. There's also some particularly interesting benchmarks when we take a look at older PC games where the 12 CUs that are on the Z2Go suddenly match up to what the Z1E is doing. So it's not that the chip isn't capable, it's just where it sits on the Windows side of things. And we do get a little bit better performance than where this was even just a few months ago with using the latest Radeon mainline drivers. So we'll show you quickly what that looks like and we'll get into all the weeds. But first, let's just jump into the specs of what you shouldn't get and specs of what you should get. So up first, we're going to take a look at this specific model, which is the Z2Go version. And right now, when you look on the Lenovo website, it is showing us $760. I cannot recommend it for that price at all. It features the Z2Go. It comes with Windows 11 Home. It has that 680M part, that 680M 12CU Radeon part that isn't really doing as well as it should be. This particular model does have 32 gigs of RAM, but largely it doesn't help all that much. Now, if you wanted to get the Z1E version with 32 gigs of RAM and use it more as like a mainline PC, this is where it's really going to start helping. Or you could also opt just to do 16 gigs of VRAM, the UMA buffer size, so that games see that it has 16 gigs of VRAM on the shared RAM space. So when you go into especially more modern games that are going to be more demanding on RAM, you're going to have a far more consistent time with that, even though that's not going to be the perfect platform to play modern games, but you could push textures and stuff onto that side and just have a better visual image quality experience while having less performance problems. The one part that I absolutely love is that 8-inch 16 by 10 1920 by 1200p screen. This is a 120 hertz panel with VRR. Honestly, I think that at this point with handhelds in my life, the 7-inch screens are my absolute minimum, what I want, and I am now starting to gravitate more to 8-inch screens. I think 8-inch screens are really starting to become more my minimum of what I would actually like to have in a handheld, even though that is fairly on the large side. I don't really think it's all that large, but I think 8-inch is really starting to be the sweet spot for where I like handhelds to be. So with all that being said, that is the Z2Go version, and it's something that I just clearly cannot recommend. I would, at the very least, if you like overall the design of the handheld, which is very nice, the screen is very nice, how it feels, all the controls and buttons are truly excellent, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a second, but I just want to kind of sidestep over to the Z1E version of this, and we'll be comparing it to the Ally X so we can have a better idea of what the Z1E is going to look like, but this is what generally the specs are on the Lenovo Legion Go with the Z1E. It's pretty much exactly the same, and the only difference here is that Z1E and the price difference. For the price what you get on this for that 8-inch screen, 32 gigs of RAM, and a Z1E, I do think that $830 is actually a fair bit high, especially when you start looking at the Ally X and you can get the Ally X on sale. However, that being said, if you can ever find the Lenovo Legion Go Z1E on sale, I would say that you should keep it in your sights. If you can find a good price on this, I think that it is definitely a winner just because overall the entire structure of it, even on the Z2Go version, right? Like my buddy Russ says, it has good bones. It really does have good bones. This is a very solid handheld let down by the Z2Go, but with the Z1E, this thing is going to start shining. So that's the specs of what you can expect for the Z2Go. What I really want to show is very quickly, I'm going to show you a quick graph of per watt TDP from the OEM drivers on the Z2Go to the latest Radeon drivers, which is really cool to see because the Z1E does not support mainline Radeon drivers. However, the Z2 series looks like it does. So with the Z2Go, we can actually use the 2551 drivers, which is what I tested on. Compared to the OEM drivers, if you take a look at the yellow line, you can see at 15 watt, we get appreciable performance, but as we start pushing more power, we actually lose performance on the older OEM drivers, which a lot of people would have initially reviewed this system on. And the green line is what you should expect with the mainline Radeon drivers for the Z2Go, which is much better. However, when we take a look at the blue line would be the ROG Ally, not X, with 6400 megatransfers of RAM on the Z1E. And you can see the difference between all of these. And you can see just how much better the Z1E is across every wattage on this graph. This is a high-level overview of showing you a very clear difference of where the Z2Go was when it initially launched, the yellow line, where the Z2 is right now on Windows, the green line, and what it can do with the Z1E, the blue line. And this is why I really recommend getting the Z1E version and trying best as you can to avoid the Z2Go version at all costs. Outside of the performance issues that can come up from the Z2Go or the Z1E, which are very important, I feel like I want to take just a quick sidestep onto all of the good news about the Z2Go, the Lenovo Legion Go S. And that is the bones that Russ calls it. And that's everything else on this platform. So this 8-inch 16 by 10, 1920 by 1200p display, which is 120 hertz with VRR. Ultimately, what this comes down to is that 8-inch screens are really what I'm finding to be my minimum preference screen size, which may be large to a lot of you, but I think once you start using it, you're going to start seeing the benefits of just how much nicer a larger screen is to play on, because it's just far more comfortable without having to bring the device so close to your face. Even if it is far away, I just feel like the 8-inch screen is just able to show off games in a better way and just make playing games far more enjoyable. But outside of that, even when we get into how the analog sticks are and the D-pad and the face buttons, this is an area that I believe that Lenovo has done an excellent job. Specifically, when we get into the analog sticks, they are more or less my preference. They have a really good range of travel on them. The amount of tension that you press on the analog stick is what my preference is. Also, the concavity of the analog stick topper itself. Everything about how they design this thing is more in line with how I would like it. Now, the D-pad itself, this is a membrane-based D-pad, but having said that, even though I prefer dome-based D-pads as my own personal preference, this membrane-based D-pad, it is truly excellent insofar as when you are using the D-pad and pressing in any particular direction, the tactility and feedback that you get from the D-pad is understood when you're pressing in it, as well as audibly hearing it. So it is a full suite of sensations to complement using the D-pad in an appropriate manner to exercise and finesse that D-pad exactly as you want it to. Truly an excellent D-pad. And the face buttons are something that kind of reminds me of like an Xbox Series face buttons in terms of press and feel. Really well done. The bumpers and the design of the grips and how it's controls and the triggers themselves, all of it is exceedingly super comfortable. So ergonomics wise, including the screen, how you hold it, feel the controls, how it all kind of wraps together, just A plus. So that is really where I love the Lenovo Legion Go. One thing that I really wish that Lenovo would have done is just put a bigger battery in the darn thing, because Asus is pretty much clean and shop around here with the Ally X and putting an 80 watt hour battery and still having the weight down. I feel like Asus really threw down the gauntlet of what to expect with these handhelds, and having just a 55 watt hour battery on this kind of is a bit of a letdown, and I would like to see an 80 watt hour minimum all the time on handhelds. We'll get into the battery life in a second, because when we take a look at how Windows works with the Z2Go is an absolute travesty. It does not manage the CPUs at all in any good way at all. So when we're playing 2D games where we should be getting excellent battery life, we don't. So in a game like Celeste, you're going to be pushing 15 watts for absolutely no reason. And you can see when I go into Celeste that when we just put in a frequency, we just put a lower CPU clock, we just put in a lower CPU clock limit, all of a sudden, we're still getting the same performance that we were getting before, but we're using exceptionally less power. The end result being that when we graph this out, if you take a look at the red line, it is the default Lenovo Legion Go S running Windows, and running something like Celeste or a 2D game, we're going to get somewhere a little bit over 3 hours of battery life. However, the blue line is just doing the CPU clock difference. So with just that one simple change, we're getting double the battery life, closer to 6.5 hours of battery on a 55 watt hour battery. So that is a far better use case of this particular device when it's capable of doing it, yet it's not able to do it automatically. And so for most people, they're just going to have ridiculously bad battery life on this device. So That's one thing that I really wish spec wise that they did better. And when you took a look when we're talking about the whole package itself, is yes, all of the things are there, but again, a bigger battery would always ultimately help. It still needs to be tweaked and tuned so that we can make better use of that battery. But I do really wish that we did have an 80-watt battery just standalone. Going further on into the battery, we can see what a normal experience looks like. And basically, there's two different profiles, and we're going to get into all of the quick access menu and all the other stuff that Lenovo has that kind of facilitates using the handheld as a handheld and borrow some things from SteamOS. But effectively, the default battery life that you're going to get typically for almost everything is going to be a little bit over 3 hours of battery life, except when you start pushing the device up to about 25-watt TDP, that's going to be the orange line. You're going to see that that's giving us effectively 1.5 hours of battery life. And you can see the difference between TDP and total system power and how that all equates and how all that works. So that is a general use case in terms of best case and worst case battery life with doing nothing. When you don't do anything, this is what you should expect. You should expect around 3.5 hours of battery life, all the way down to about 1.5 hours of battery life, which is not great at all. Before we start taking a look at the software side of things, I do want to finish up the technical side of this review. So I would like to bring up the stress test components of this so that when we take a look at this from the angle of how, when we push this device to its max, how does that look? And when we take a look at this particular graph, this is a 7-hour stress test. And what you can see is that the system will kind of oscillate between going from 25 watt to 30 watt. And you can see that temps kind of fluctuate from a max of like 85 degrees Celsius down to about 80 degrees Celsius. And it doesn't really change through that period. So we're at a max TDP of around 25 to 30 watt, and that will fluctuate. Now, this is in a real benchmark. So you're seeing it kind of transition into different parts. So it's using as much power as it can automatically dictate. Going up to 30 watt TDP is effectively 85 degrees Celsius. That has no bearing on the external thermals of the device. So when you're actually holding the device, you don't feel any heat whatsoever. You do hear the fan, obviously, that is audible. It's only really not audible when you really go down to super low TDPs. Otherwise, you can hear it at all times. So that is most of the technical review. Let's get into very specific benchmarks for game benchmarks, just so you can have a better idea of where the Z2Go is compared to the Z1E, like in the Asus ROG Ally X, and also what you might get from the Lenovo Legion Go with the Z1E, so you can get a better idea of just how much better things can get there. So let's jump straight into the benchmarks, and we'll start talking about the software side of things. This is going to be absolutely brutal, so let's just get straight into it. Up first, we're going to be taking a look at Batman Arkham Knight, 720p with max settings, and I am comparing the Ally X with the Z1E, which has 7500 megatransfers of RAM, compared to the Lenovo Legion Go using the Z2Go. Now, what I'm hoping to kind of convey here is that you can get very similar performance if you just get the Lenovo Legion Go with the Z1E in it. So you're going to see how much better that system is while still having all of the niceties that is on the Lenovo Legion Go S, like the controls, the size of the device, the battery, the screen. All of that will transfer over, and all of that stuff is excellent. It's really just that Z2Go chip that's letting us down. So getting straight into it, we'll first start off by looking at the 10-watt results. And when we take a look at 10 watt from the Z2Go to the Z1E is around 40% better on averages and 75% better on 1 percentile. Now at 10 watt, this is almost playable at 720p max settings on the Ally X. Once we go up to 15 watt, then it becomes much, much nicer. But on the Z2Go, we need 15 watt just for it to become basically playable. On averages, we're looking at 60% better on the Z1E and 60% better on 1 percentile. Then going up to 20 watt for the Z2Go, again, we still have that 50% lead. We're spending the same amount of power here on package, right? So it's 20 watt and 20 watt on package. And we have a 50% better on averages and 55% better on 1 percentile. So again, it's just getting destroyed. The Z2Go is getting destroyed, and the Z1E version, even though that is an older platform, it is much nicer than whatever the Z2Go actually is, because it's not good enough. And especially for the price, it just makes no sense. Let's go and look at Cyberpunk. Once again, we're going right into Cyberpunk 2077. This is 720p with the Steam Deck preset with no upscaling. So all upscaling has been turned off. We're doing 720p native here. And we take a look at the Z2Go at 10 watt. It's just atrocious at 11 FPS, and we're 36% better on the Ally X at 10 watt. On 1 percentile, we're like 2.5 times better. So just giant difference. Even though a 10 watt on the Ally X with these settings is not really playable on the Ally X, but it's still a large difference. Once we go up to 15 watt, that's where we're starting to get into playable specs for what we need to play Cyberpunk at 720p. On averages, we're only about at 9% difference, but our 1 percentile, that's where things just get crazy. That's 65% different on 1 percentile. Naturally, 0.2 percentile is 3 times different. So the feel of actually playing on 15 watt between these two are worlds apart. And even when we go to 20 watt, we still have that same issue. If we go to look at our averages, we're about 30% better on averages, going from 35 FPS to 45 FPS from the Z2Go to the Z1E. And looking at 1 percentile, we're 2 times better. So at 20 watt on the RG Ally X, that is a far more comfortable place to be playing with these particular settings. And on the Z2Go, it really isn't even good enough even at 20 watt. So that's really where, again, all these problems come from. Let's go to the next game. The next game we're going to be taking a look at is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. This is 720p with ultra settings and using the DirectX 11 backend. And what is very interesting for here is that we have found an area where the Z2Go is able to actually better compete with the Z1E in a manner that it really should be kind of competing in. Like, it should be like this. So it's really interesting that older PC games that are DirectX 11 are showing this particular performance. So pretty interesting data. This game's 10 years old. It's the tail end of DirectX 11 games. Let's take a look at 10 watt. At 10 watt, we're basically exactly the same on averages, 13.1. At our 1 percentile, we're 50% better, and our 0.2 percentile is 50% better as well. So we're getting better 1 percentile and 0.2 percentile. So the better how the stutter feels on there is going to be far better on Z1E. But even our averages, it's just a lot closer. It's very interesting results looking at this. When we take a look at our 15-watt result, again, our averages are basically the same. And in here, we actually see the Z2Go is actually beating on 1 percentile and 0.2 percentile. So look at this. We're actually up by like 9% on 1 percentile, and we're up about 14% on 0.2 percentile for the Z2Go, both of them being 15 watt. Super interesting. And at 20 watt, the Z1E actually takes the lead at 60% better on averages, 15% better on 1 percentile, and 10% better on 0.2 percentile. Just really interesting results, and we can almost see where the Z2Go is really starting to get tripped up. And it's really with what I would argue is on the CPU side of things and scheduling everything on the CPU side and power distribution on the APU itself, where this thing just gets kind of nuts. And going back to older games where you're not going to be leaning on multi-core so much, you just really need 2 threads at most. That is going to be really driving everything and having that go to a fast frequency. Just very interesting results for older games on this platform where things just kind of fall apart on newer stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next game. And the last game we'll be taking a look at is Returnal. Now, I normally would always look at this with FSR2 balance, and I'm going to start doing this just with native. So we're doing Returnal 720p native and low settings. And we take a look at our 1 percentile. Again, we're back to the old ways where the Z1E is just destroying it. If we take a look at our averages, 50% better on averages, 70% better on 1 percentile, it's just a giant difference, even when both of them are locked at 10 watt. When we go up to 15 watt, again, we have 18 FPS average or 28 FPS average in the same wattage for the Z1E or the Z2Go. So 53% better on the Z1E, 1 percentile, 60% better. Then when we go up to 20 watts, still isn't playable on the Z2Go, but it is playable on the Z1E. We're looking at 66% better on averages, going from 22 FPS to about 36 FPS. And then our 1 percentile is going from 13 FPS to 25 FPS in our 1 percentile. So another 83% difference there. So really interesting results when we insert that older DirectX 11 game in there, and we see those 12 CUs competing in a way that makes a lot more sense compared to a 12 CU part for the Z1E. But with those 4 CPU cores, it feels like something is just completely amiss with the CPU scheduler, for at least as far as Windows is concerned. So insofar as using this on Windows, it's a complete, it's a non-starter. You can't really use this. If you were looking at the Lenovo Legion Go, especially for Windows, you really should be opting for the Z1E version. It also has 32 gigs of RAM, so you'll be able to boost the VRAM up to like 16 gigs instead of 16 gigs of system RAM. It's just a far better, more consistent experience, and you still get all the niceties on a Lenovo Legion Go. Yes. So that is it for the benchmarks, and that should hopefully, with the original graph that we showed you of the per watt high level overview of the difference between the Z2Go when it was OEM, the Z2Go with the latest drivers, and then the Z1E, and how that compares per game. The only one that is an interesting nugget of information would be the Deus Ex Mankind Divided benchmarks that we saw, where the 12CU part, the 680M that is in the Z2Go, is more in line with what the 780M is on the Z1E. And that's more what we should expect. So really, it just comes down to what we're seeing is the Windows scheduler, ACP type of side of Windows, just doing a very poor job of handling the Z2Go specific chipset. And that really needs to get fixed. So that's the performance side of things. So you have a better understanding of that. The last part of this review that I want to talk about is on the software side. And I think Lenovo really did a good job. But I think as we start getting into like the Xbox experience that's going to be coming from Windows later on this year, that all of this should hopefully get streamlined a bit more. Is that when we take a look at it, it offers a lot of functionality, and some of the functionality I don't think is all that worthwhile. Like if we go into the performance section of the quick access menu on the Lenovo Legion Go S, it offers like power efficient, power savings, balance, and high performance. These are just hotkeys for Windows power settings, which are already mucked up from the ACP Windows scheduler side of things. So it's not all that helpful to you at all as an end user on what that does or what it accomplishes. So when we really want is something that is going to be able to control TDP in a better manner. The other controls that we have are going to be general controls that you're going to have on the controls itself. The one part that's honestly a big shame is this little touchpad. And this is probably the one thing of the outside of the device, the bones of the device, that I would say that is honestly terrible. It's just not good at all. And I don't know how it's shipped as it was. I just leave it off at all times because I have not found a time where that trackpad has been useful. There is a haptics version that you can enable in it, and it just feels like gross rumble at all times when you're using it. So I don't really get the point of the haptics part because all of this just feels really haphazard and kind of just sloppy in terms of how it's enabled and how it's used, that even with gross touch input, especially for fine stuff where you need to like touch little sliders and stuff in this video example, it was easier for me to use my finger to grossly touch an area to kind of like tap the slider into an area rather than using that touchpad. That touchpad really needs to be tuned up a lot, or using gyro of some kind to get a mouse working, because how that is right now is just genuinely terrible. Other options that are in the quick access menu are quick hotkeys that you can do, and that's convenient enough. But again, I feel like all of this quick access menu type of stuff is going to get kind of reconfigured in that Xbox experience side of things. And if you're on Steam OS, you would obviously have all the Steam OS quick access menu type of stuff. So that's it from the software side of things. And largely this review is kind of a mixed bag, because ultimately what I'm telling you is under no circumstances should you get the Z2Go version of this. You should only ever get the Z1E version of this. The SteamOS version that uses Z2Go does operate better, but you're going to be limited to SteamOS, which isn't terrible. But also, if you can get a good price on it, then that is also not that bad of a deal. But it's such a weird chip that even when we take a look at the Z1E on other platforms, and when we start thinking about prices and stuff, things just get really muddy really fast. So this finds itself in this particular model, the Lenovo Legion Go S. Definitely keep your eye on the Z1E version, because the Z2Go version, I just can't recommend at the price, at any price point, when we compare it to other handhelds that are on the market. Thank you very much to my YouTube channel members as well as my Patreon members. Your support really means the world to me, guys. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.